Welcome to the Thriving Christian Artist, the podcast where we hope you connect with God to bust through the roadblocks that have held you back for years, create the work you love, and really live the life you know God created you to live as an artist in His kingdom. I'm Matt Thomas, your host. Let's get started. Well, hey there, my friend, and welcome to the podcast today. I'm so glad that you're with me. Listen, it's going to be a treat today. We're actually getting to talk to David Rawlings, who is an incredible author that I've just gotten to know, who's from Australia. You know, sometimes when people write new books or, have new music or new pieces of art or that sort of thing, they'll reach out and say, hey, do you know this guy? And, you know, honestly, sometimes I'm like, yeah, okay, I don't know if it's a fit or not. But man, when I met David and when I read his books, wow, what a connection we had on this podcast. And I think you're going to really love it. David is a thoughtful, incredible author that not only writes beautifully, but also expresses his heart for the Lord through the fiction books that he writes in such an unexpected and beautiful way. And I think you're really going to enjoy this podcast because he really dives into kind of the behind the scenes stories of why he does what he does, and also about the real practicality of how he makes his living as an author that's written 3 books, has won some major awards, and is still sort of in what we call a bridge pattern. That is a kind of a bivocational situation where he's not only working as a professional copywriter in the business world, but he's also writing the fiction books that he loves and managing all of that. I know a lot of us can relate to that. I know for me, that was my story for a lot of years until I became a professional, full-time vocational artist. And a lot of you I know that are listening are in that situation. You're kind of on the way to becoming the full-time artist or a real focused artist vocationally that you want to be. And so I know that this is going to be a really big encouragement to you. Hey, listen, as we're getting started today, I want to do 2 things. Number one, I want to let you know that the Global Arts Summit that I launched, I guess it's been back in on May the 5th, that's still up and running. It's still an incredible opportunity, if you've not checked that out, to hear from over 28 arts leaders from around the world, people like Sean Bowles, Makoto Fujimura, myself, Ray Hughes, Teresa Dedman, Dr. Byron Spradlin, Stephen Roach, and so many others that are out there. It's completely free. We do ask that you register just so you can get to it on our website, but you'll have free lifetime access to it. It's 28 videos that are about 10 to 15 minutes a piece. Really practical information on how you can be thriving as an artist in the kingdom during this pandemic and post-pandemic world that we're living in, and answering questions like, what's God saying? How can we use our art during this time to make a difference? And how can we really prepare now to thrive in the season that's upcoming? So I want to definitely make sure that you've checked that out. So many of you have. Thousands of people have registered for it all over the world. And again, it's all recorded. Once you register, you have instant access, and you can listen to those at your leisure on any device that you want. All right. The other thing I want to do, of course, is give a shout out to one of my podcast listeners. Alan34 left me a great review, and I just wanted to read that one today. It says, high energy art encouragement. Recently discovered Matt Tommy and love the enthusiasm, truth, and encouragement and challenge that he brings to the table. He helps artists think through their purpose and vision and challenges them to take bolder steps with their art, no matter what the skill level. Well, Alan, thank you so much. It's always a huge blessing to me to read reviews like this and just know that you're out there listening, know that it's really making a difference in your life. And listen, if you're out there and you've not reviewed or subscribed to the podcast, please do that. You can do that on just about whatever software that you're listening to, on whatever device you're listening to. Just click the subscribe button to make sure that you don't miss any of the podcasts that come out twice a week on Tuesdays and on Fridays. And then also write a review. It just lets me know and others know that this podcast is a blessing to you. All right. Well, guys, I'm going to get out of the way. You're going to love this interview with my new friend, Australian author David Rawlings. Well, hey, everybody, I'm so glad that you're with me on the podcast today. I've got a new friend of mine here with me all the way from Australia, author David Rawlings. David, thank you so much, man, for being on with us today.
No, it's a pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me on. I should say g'day. I mean, it is constitutional down here to say that.
Exactly
So,
right.
yeah, g'day.
That's right. Well, I'm really glad you're here. I got a book of yours in the mail, and I was like, who is this guy, David Rawlings? And then all of a sudden, I opened your book, and I couldn't stop reading. And my wife's like, what are you reading? I'm like, it's this awesome new book called Where the Road Bends. And I just loved it. And I'm so glad to have you on the podcast today. So for those who may not be familiar with you, just kind of a little bit of who you are, what you do creatively, and where you are in the world.
Sure. So I'm based in Adelaide, which is in South Australia. So think of us as in the middle of Australia, but at the bottom. So we're in the south. We're right on the beach down here. We're a beach country pretty much down here in Australia. So that's where I live. In terms of creatively, I'm creative all the time in the sense of I'm a professional copywriter. So as I keep saying to people, the fiction is something new. But I've always put words on the page so I can put food on the table. I've done it for nearly 30 years. So the whole idea of using words, they're my tools. I got a good mate who's a carpenter, and he's amazing on a building site. I look at his tools and I don't know which end to hold. But when it comes to words, the words are my tools. And so that's what I'm using. And yeah, I've written corporately. I've been a journalist for a while, and now I've turned my hand to fiction. And thank you so much for saying what you said about Where the Road Bends. It's really nice to hear when you've put energy into a story and you've worked through a novel that people are enjoying it. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, did you grow up in a family of creatives, or was the creative thing kind of a wild hair for you?
No, writing probably. No, my father's family is extraordinarily musical. So my father's family's heritage is Salvation Army, where they pretty much hand
Cool.
you some kind of brass instrument the minute you're born.
Exactly.
And so, I think Dad went through, and something like 90% of the 50 or 60 people in the wider family all play brass. So I guess that's where the creative bent came. But in terms of writing, no, it's just something that I've always done. And my mum says the minute I could pick up a pencil, I did. And
Wow.
so, yeah, that's just how I express myself, I guess.
That's great. So a lot of people that are listening to our podcast are a lot of emerging artists, people that are kind of in the process of finding their voice, what they do creatively and that sort of thing, and going across what I call the bridge from where you are now to where you want to be, maybe doing what you're doing part-time, full-time, that sort of thing. I love it that you are, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, but unapologetically in the world of copywriting and writing professionally and that sort of thing, and at the same time doing your fiction work. What is that balance like for you? Is that something that's annoying, or is that something that's you've come to terms with and you're great with?
No, I think like most creatives and probably most people listening, it's annoying. That bridge you talked about can be a long bridge.
Yeah.
I'm still on that bridge in the sense of needing to do client work to keep afloat, and very slowly transitioning to writing fiction for a living. But I mean, as people know, that takes a while. And yeah, I think the best way to view it is I'm probably 5 years into my overnight success. So got a long way to go yet.
Good way to say that. I love that, because I think that the things that make us be able to keep going on that bridge, the little daily habits, the tenacity that it takes and that sort of thing. So many people underestimate that in their creative journey. And I was just writing something on Facebook not too long ago. I mean, just a few minutes ago. And I was like, people give up too soon because they're like, I got to find my voice, or I got to see this happen. And I'm like, your creative voice, and I think your whole identity and brand as an artist evolves more than it is found. It evolves as you kind of keep doing what you're doing, and opportunities come and you take advantage of those and all that. So what are the things that, as you look back at your journey to this point, what are the kind of difference makers, do you think, in your life that have enabled you to stay on that bridge, just to keep being tenacious and keep pursuing, even amid having to do things like we've all done, to pay the bills?
That's a great question. Look, I think there are two halves to that. I think from the craft point of view, I'm very disciplined in writing because I have to be. So if I have a client, I've got a client project at the moment down here, doing a large government website. which has got a launch date. And so therefore I need to deliver my copy on a certain date, and there is no room to move, and I can't push it out, and I can't procrastinate. I just have to do it. So I think that's one of the things that I'm finding I'm taking from my professional life and applying it to the creative stuff is I know what it's like to hit a deadline. And I think that's important. You're absolutely right. I speak to people all the time, and this seems to be the common thread when they say they've started a novel.
Right.
Very few people have said they've ever finished one. And so I think for me, I'm bringing a professional sense of I just have to get it done. I mean, Where the Road Bends is out in early June, which means I would have had 3 novels published with HarperCollins in 16 months.
Yeah.
And so, and a lot of that is down to, from the craft side of it, just a dedication to, I know I've got to knock out 750 to 1200 words a day in some periods, and some periods it's, editing 6,000 or 7,000. I just have to get it done.
Right.
So there's that side of it. The other side of it is I really genuinely believe this is a calling. And so that is a seriously motivating factor when you feel that this isn't just something that you'd like to do, but it's something that you're meant to do. And I know with The Baggage Handler, my debut novel, I get messages from people saying, thanks so much for writing the story. This is the role it's played in me reconnecting with God, my family. I had one woman who emailed me to say that she'd read The Baggage Handler and now was talking to her sister for the first time in 20 years. And when you hear that sort of stuff, that is a motivation in itself, because those types of stories are still out there and those types of readers are still out there. And maybe the novel that I write next could be the one thing that speaks to them, and God uses it in a way that genuinely turns them around and speaks to them. So that's the other side of keeping me going, is apart from the craft and the mechanics of it, I think this is a calling. And I think this is, when you're called, you genuinely do motivate yourself and push yourself.
Right. Roll back the tape and talk about when you first started to understand that connection. Because I think for a lot of people, I know for me at least, I had my creative life in a silo over here, and I had my professional life over here, my spiritual life over there. And I lived a lot of years before I realized that there was a holistic approach, that God wanted to bring all that together, not only for my fulfillment, but for the transformation of others, that out of my own transformation, others could be transformed. And through what God had done in my life and through my story. And how did that evolution happen for you? Because everybody has a different way they approach that.
Yeah. Look, for me, I was always going to write fiction. I started writing fiction when I was a kid, like we all do. And I just loved it. And then when I went into my late teens, went to university, I studied journalism. And then I moved into the corporate sector and I started to build a career. I was always going to come back to it. And even to the point where I would collect story ideas and just flesh them out and leave them in my laptop. And in 2015, I genuinely felt convicted by God. And very clearly, he said to me, and I say this as someone who, as an Australian and a guy, doesn't really feel comfortable saying this, so I know it was legitimate. God gave me 2 words about fiction. Now, I was hoping for bestseller.
Right.
I could have handled publishing contract, but the 2 words were trust me. And see, from my point of view, I'd put aside this idea of writing fiction until I had enough money, enough clients, I had enough time, I had enough margin in my life to be able to put everything else aside and do it. It's the silo that you talked about.
Right.
And really felt convicted that God said, I've already given you enough. What are you waiting for? And so I jumped in. And that was 2015, and my debut novel came out in 2019. Now, there was a roller coaster in between there, as every creative goes on. But for me, it was that moment of saying, okay, well, maybe I do have enough. And this idea that this one day that I was hoping for was never going to come. I just needed to trust and get on with it. And so that's what I've done.
I love that quote from Henry Blackaby that wrote Experiencing God years ago. He said, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And it's like we get our qualification as we continue to say yes, right, along the journey. It's like, step out and I'll show you. And you're like, show me and I'll step out, right? It's always that. So
yeah, well, that was my experience too, because I'm trying to work to pay the bills. I've got a family. I've got 3 kids.
Yeah,
I've got a wider family, and so I just looked at the calendar and said, how can I slot into my calendar room to write?
Mm.
and genuinely felt that God said, give me the calendar and just watch.
Wow.
And that's pretty much what happened. So even to the point of the baggage handler, the debut novel, that's the one that won the Christie Award. I was working out what to write next, and this idea downloaded.
Wow.
As I keep saying to people, my baggage arrived one night, and in 4 hours, the idea of a novel was born. And so,
Wow.
even things like that, I wonder if that gift would have been given if I'd still been trying to work it out myself.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's the answers come as we continue to say yes, as we continue to step out. And I always say God directs our steps, not our standing still. Right?
Oh,
there's the place to
exactly right.
there's the place to wait
Exactly
and,
right.
listen to Him, but at the same time we got to keep moving. So, well, kind of to switch into your creative process a little bit. I love the fact, so I've read, your third book, Where the Road Bends. Love it. I immediately, when you sent me the other books, picked up the Baggage Handler, and when I opened it up and started reading, I was like, I can totally recognize his voice, like in both books,
Mm-hmm.
creatively. I'm picking up on things. I'm starting to feel who you are as an artist, and I love the fact that you are. It seems to me. I mean, I've written 6 books, but all nonfiction, so they're not. I'm not in any way a novelist, but I love the fact that you are an excellent writer and very entertaining in what you do, and at the same time, you are unabashedly going for connection and a deeper message in what you're doing, but not in a trite way, in a really
Mm-hmm.
interesting, beautiful, well-written kind of way. So talk about that, because that seems to be very much in the front of what you're trying to do as an artist. Am I right on that? Or
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Look, what I'm writing here is a modern day parable.
mm,
Excuse me. Um, what I'm trying to do is get across the values that I believe in through story. Now, story is really powerful. Story's always been powerful. You look back at Jewish tradition, story was genuinely the way that tradition was handed down from generation to generation. I mean, in my
yeah,
country, our First Nations people, the Aboriginal people, have been passing down story for tens of thousands of years. It cuts through.
yeah,
And I know that part of my work life is I work at a university, and where everybody tries to think their way through life. And the number of conversations I have with people, you're talking about some really deep stuff that connects with people. You have to get past sort of academic arguments and get to the heart of something that speaks to people one to one. So that's what I'm trying to do when I'm writing stories. So I mean, looking back, one of the things that I really love about the way Jesus spoke to people, and you can talk about, his knowledge of scripture as inspiration, he had an absolute knack for cutting to the chase.
yeah.
And standing in a group of people who want to kill a woman for her sin, and he basically doesn't buy into that argument. He says, actually, no, what we need to talk about is that.
Mm,
And there's so many times in the New Testament where you see Jesus actually going, yeah, that's peripheral. This is the real issue. And I
mm,
think for me, that's what I'm trying to do as well, is when I have conversations with people, I'm the guy who wants to have a talk about the deeper things. I don't do small talk comfortably.
mm.
Small talk's an introduction to something deeper. And so I'm writing in the same way, in this coming up with a way to connect or engage with people to teach a deeper truth. Now, with the baggage handler, it all starts with lost bags or lost luggage on an airport carousel. And I've spoken to thousands of people who say, you know what, I've done that too.
Mm,
And the second book, The Camera Never Lies, is about an old-fashioned camera and the number of people who say, I would not like it if I had a camera that revealed my secrets either. See, they've gone straight to the connection. So
wow.
I spent a bit of time thinking about how to connect with people, because I don't think if you do, I think it's easily discounted as too preachy, because
Mm,
it's just not relevant to people. And people are time poor. People are very defensive. I find it fascinating that people are engaging through story. In fact, I had one woman who, on the same day, I had 2 emails about the baggage handler. One reader said, thank you for writing The Baggage Handler. It's obvious to me that the baggage handler is a Jesus figure. I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, I get it. That
mm,
was followed an hour later by a woman who said, I'm a deeply spiritual person. God doesn't exist. I hate the church. I've been burnt by the church. Christians are frauds. but now I'm starting to evaluate my life on the basis of what you wrote, because I can see that the baggage handler is an allegory that's spiritual. So
Wow.
the fact that one story could reach two people in not so much opposing camps, but just different universes
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
fascinating. But it backed up what I'm trying to do,
Yeah.
which
I
is
love that.
try to get across values through story.
That's so beautiful. One of the things I deal with a lot as somebody who's mentoring a lot of artists that are coming into what they're doing, and primarily visual artists, although we work with a lot of writers and photographers, musicians, people like that. But people who are Christians and then maybe get introduced or reawakened to their creativity in the context of their faith often find themselves in a weird position in that they feel a lot of pressure to label what they do as overtly Christian. And it sets them up for this
Mm-hmm.
weird kind of pressure, that comes on their creativity. Is it Christian enough? Is it not Christian enough? And that sort of thing. And I've always come at it from kind of a place of mystery, whereas I believe God really cares much more that I create than what I create. And that as I
Yeah.
invite him into that process and offer my creative process and the fruit of my labors to him, he then takes that and does so much more with it than I could ever do myself. And that mystery, which is what I think you're talking about, is this, you wrote
Yeah.
a book and you put it out there, and now God's doing what God's going to do with that. That's a beautiful part of that story for me. So do you struggle with that? Like, I'm a Christian, I want this to be Christian, but I don't want it to be too Christian? Or, I mean, where are you in that whole process of allowing the work to speak freely?
I don't struggle with it at all, but I understand the struggle.
Yeah.
I've had a number of conversations online with other Christian authors about what Christian fiction actually is, because
Mm,
the definitions, there are definitions at either end of the spectrum, and then 1,000 of them in between.
yeah.
Is Christian fiction that's written to make Christians feel better about what they believe in? Is Christian fiction completely about salvation?
Mm,
Is Christian fiction something that's written by Christians? One of the best definitions I think I've ever had was I was talking to a fellow HarperCollins author in Cara Putman, who writes legal suspense, and her view, and I think I agree with her, is the fact that Christian fiction isn't just about salvation, it's about redemption and resurrection.
that's good.
So if you look at my stories, I mean, in The Baggage Handler, no spoilers, but one of the characters doesn't find redemption, but he's now on a journey where redemption is likely to come later.
Mm,
Now, I have a number of people connect with that, because not everything ends up with a nice bow tied at the end of it.
right.
So for me, I'm a Christian writing fiction. I write redemptive stories. The people in my novels find redemption in some part of their life. Not all of them go through a salvation experience. I mean, my argument's always been, if a Christian reads fiction for a salvation story, how many times can they be saved?
Right.
It's yeah. It's not necessarily, boy, the traditional trope of girl meets boy, girl tells boy about Jesus, boy becomes pastor, the end. That's something that I think people are starting to push back on, because you use the word trite, and I think that's sometimes how it's perceived,
Yeah.
is that it's a little bit too, I don't want to use the word shallow, because that brings with it a whole range of other
Right. Or too perfect almost,
tags.
right?
It's too perfect for the world we live in. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, I don't shy away from what I believe in. And I certainly would, if somebody challenged me, is this Christian fiction or not, I would point them to the sections of the novels that are clearly my values.
Hmm.
It's just that I'm not trying to I'm not trying to tell a story with three main points and then a closing prayer and then hand over for the worship leader for a Chris Tomlin song. It's not
Right.
a church service dressed up as a novel. It's engaging people with the deeper values that can benefit people. And when you look back, that's one of the things I admire with what Jesus did with parables. He told a story that he connected with them and then left them to think about or deal with how it impacted on them.
Yeah.
Very few parables ended up with, and then 1,000 people got saved and the church grew.
Most of it was
Jesus
Selah,
made
right?
it.
People thought about it and got confused and frustrated, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. So, yeah, for me, it's not confusing at all. I'm a Christian who writes fiction, and I'm not quite sure that Christian fiction is simply has God on every second page and has an
Yeah.
altar call at the end. And I'm sure that's the same would go with any creative process for anybody in any kind of creative field.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, I'm glad that you're a Jesus follower and you're doing what you're doing so beautifully, and I'm enjoying it. I know tons of my listeners are going to want to check out your books and follow what you're doing. So, David, where's the best place that they can get to know you and what you're doing creatively out there in the world?
Sure. Well, if you go to my website, which is www.davidrawlings.com.au. Now, you need the .au bit. That's the Australian part of the internet. And you'll find excerpts from The Baggage Handler. That last year won the Christie Award for the best debut novel of the year. The Camera Never Lies, and the new one, Where the Road Bends. You can read some excerpts, you can see some trailers, and you can order or pre-order if you like. Or I'd love to talk to people as well. I love to start conversations. I mean, that's why I write, is to start conversations with people. So Head to Facebook, you'll find me at David Rawlings Author, and drop me a message, join the conversation and talk about something a bit deeper in life. And particularly in a world of COVID-19 and everybody locked in their homes, read a story and escape for a bit, and then talk to people, outside your immediate area about some of the impacts it's had on you.
Absolutely. Well, David, it's been such a pleasure to get to put a face with your words and get to hear a little bit more about your story. And thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with me today on the podcast. Listen, I hope it's been a huge encouragement to you on your journey as an artist. Hey, also, before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the other episodes of the Thriving Christian Artist podcast. And also, be sure to connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at my website, which is matttommymentoring.com. Until next time, remember, you were created to thrive. Bye-bye.